I still remember the sound of the carriage wheels on gravel the night he cast me out. I had loved him with every breath in my body, and he destroyed me with a single word. My name is Eleanor Ashford, though I was once Eleanor Gray, daughter of a country vicar with more pride than fortune. I became the Duchess of Winterbourne on a cold April morning 6 years ago, when I was 19 and foolish enough to believe that love could bridge the chasm between our worlds. Alexander Hargrave, the Duke of Winterbourne, was 10 years my senior, a man of granite silence and rare smiles. He had chosen me not for my dowry or my connections, but because, he said, I made him feel human again after years of cold duty. I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. Our first year of marriage was a season of quiet happiness. Winterbourne Hall, that vast estate of gray stone and ancient oaks, became my home. I learned to move through its shadowed corridors with grace, to pour tea for the dowagers who scrutinized my every gesture, to smile through the whispers that followed a vicar's daughter who had risen so impossibly high. Alexander was not a demonstrative man, but in the privacy of our chambers, he would take my hand and hold it as though I were something precious. He never said he loved me, not in words, but I felt it in the way he watched me across crowded ballrooms, in the way his voice softened when he spoke my name. Then, his sister arrived. Lady Catherine Hargrave had been traveling on the continent for years, and her return to Winterbourne was marked by grand celebration. She was beautiful in a way I would never be, with dark hair and a commanding presence that made every room bend toward her. From the first evening, I felt her eyes on me, measuring, calculating. She kissed my cheek and called me sister, but her smile never reached her eyes. It was Catherine who planted the first seed of doubt. A month after her arrival, she mentioned almost carelessly that she had seen me in the rose garden speaking with Lord Pemberton, a young viscount who had been a guest at the estate. I had indeed spoken with him, a brief conversation about nothing of consequence, but the way Catherine described it made it sound clandestine, improper. Alexander said nothing at the time, but I saw something flicker in his eyes, something cold and watchful. The whispers began after that. Small things at first. A letter that went missing from my writing desk, only to reappear in the library where Alexander might find it. An servant who claimed to have seen me walking alone in the east wing at odd hours. A piece of jewelry, a gift from a distant cousin, that Catherine insisted looked like something a lover might bestow. Each incident was trivial on its own, but together they wove a net around me, invisible and tightening. I was carrying our child when the final blow fell. I had known for 2 months, but I had not yet told Alexander. I wanted to choose the perfect moment, to see his face soften with wonder the way I had dreamed it would. I never got the chance. One evening in late autumn, Catherine came to Alexander with a letter. She claimed she had intercepted it from a servant, a letter addressed to me in a man's hand. I never saw the letter. I never knew what it said. But Alexander's face when he confronted me that night was a mask of ice and fury. He stood in the doorway of our chamber and asked me if I had been faithful to him. I stared at him, uncomprehending. I told him of course I had, that I loved him, that I was carrying his child. He did not believe me. Catherine had poisoned him too thoroughly. He looked at me as though I were a stranger, as though the past year and a half had been a lie. He gave me 1 hour to pack my belongings. He would not hear my pleas, would not let me speak. His voice, when he finally spoke, was flat and final. He told me I was no longer his wife in anything but name, that I was to leave Winterbourne Hall immediately, and that I was never to contact him again. When I tried to tell him about the child, he turned his back on me. He said he would not raise another man's bastard under his roof. The carriage that took me away that night was not even one of the family's. It was a hired coach, shabby and cold, as though even the conveyance that bore me from my home had to reflect my disgrace. I had no money, no family who could help me. My father had died the year before, and my mother had passed when I was a child. I had nowhere to go. The driver took me to a coaching inn 20 miles from Winterbourne, and there I stayed for a week, spending the last of the few coins I had managed to take with me. When the money ran out, I found work in the inn's kitchen, scrubbing pots and sleeping in a corner of the scullery. I was sick every morning, my body growing heavier as the child inside me grew. The innkeeper's wife was kind enough not to ask questions, but I saw the pity in her eyes. I was a fallen woman, a duchess brought low, and there was no path back to the world I had known. I thought of Alexander every day, every hour. I thought of his face, of the way he had looked at me with such contempt. I thought of the child I carried, a child he believed was not his. I wept until I had no tears left, and then I wept some more. Winter came, and with it a bitter cold that seeped into my bones. I could no longer work in the kitchen. My body was too weak, too swollen. The innkeeper's wife gave me a small room above the stables, a gesture of charity I did not deserve, but accepted with trembling gratitude. It was there, on a night when the wind howled like a dying thing, that my daughter was born. I had no midwife, only the innkeeper's wife and her steady hands. The pain was beyond anything I had imagined, a tearing agony that went on for hours. But when I heard her first cry, small and fierce, I forgot everything else. She was perfect, tiny and red and perfect. She had a dusting of dark hair and eyes that would not focus, but I saw Alexander in her face immediately. The shape of her brow, the set of her mouth. She was his daughter, unmistakably, undeniably. I held her against my chest and wept, knowing that he would never see her, never know her, never believe that she was his. I named her Clara after my mother. For 3 days, I held her and nursed her and whispered to her all the things I would never be able to give her. I had no money, no home, no future. I could not raise her in a stable loft, could not condemn her to a life of poverty and shame because of my disgrace. The innkeeper's wife spoke gently to me about the orphanage in the nearby market town, a place run by a charitable society where children were cared for and, if they were fortunate, adopted into decent families. She said it with kindness, but I heard the truth beneath her words. I could not keep my child. On the 4th day, I wrapped Clara in the one good shawl I still owned and carried her to the orphanage. It was a gray stone building with narrow windows, stern and cold. A woman in a plain dark dress met me at the door. She did not ask my name or my story. She simply took Clara from my arms, so gently, and told me the child would be cared for. I stood on the steps and watched the door close, and I felt something inside me break that has never mended. I do not remember the walk back to the inn. I do not remember the days that followed. I know only that I survived. Somehow, because my body would not let me do otherwise. The innkeeper's wife found me work in a household in the market town, a position as a companion to an elderly widow. It was respectable work, quiet and dull, and it kept me fed. I moved through my days like a ghost, performing my duties without thought, speaking only when spoken to. At night, I lay awake and thought of Clara. I wondered if she cried, if she was warm, if she knew somehow that I had not wanted to leave her. Years passed. 3, then 4, then 5. The widow I served died, and I found another position, this time as a seamstress in a shop that catered to the minor gentry. I was good with a needle, and the work was steady. I saved every penny I could, though I did not know what I was saving for. I had no dreams left, no hopes. I existed, and that was all. But I thought of Clara every day. On her birthday, I would light a candle in my small rented room and imagine her face. Try to picture what she might look like at 1 year old, at 2, at 3. I imagined her laughing, running, speaking her first words. I imagined a life for her that was better than anything I could have given her. And I told myself that I had done the right thing, that she was better off without me. It was in the 5th year after her birth that I learned the orphanage accepted volunteers. Women from the town, respectable widows and spinsters, would come to read to the children or teach them their letters. I do not know what possessed me to inquire, but one day I found myself standing at the orphanage door once more, asking the stern woman who ran the place if I might be of use. She looked at me with sharp eyes and asked if I had experience with children. I lied and said I did. She nodded and told me I could come on Tuesdays and Thursdays to help with the younger ones. I began the following week. The children were kept in a large room with whitewashed walls and narrow beds lined up in rows. There were perhaps 20 of them, ranging in age from infancy to 10 years or so. They were clean and adequately fed, but there was a sadness about them, a wary silence that broke my heart. I moved among them, helping the matrons with their lessons, reading stories, mending torn smocks, and I looked for Clara in every face. I found her on my third visit. She was sitting apart from the other children, a small girl of 5 with dark hair pulled back in a braid. She was bent over a slate, carefully forming letters with a piece of chalk. I stopped breathing. Her profile was Alexander's unmistakably, the same straight nose, the same determined set to her jaw. And when she looked up at me, her eyes were gray, the exact shade of his. She did not know me. Of course she did not. I was a stranger, just another volunteer in a succession of well-meaning women. But I knew her. I knew her with every fiber of my being. My daughter. My Clara. I knelt beside her and asked her name. She looked at me with those solemn gray eyes and said, "Clara." Just that, nothing more. I asked her if she liked her letters, and she nodded. I asked her if she would like me to read her a story, and she nodded again. I sat with her for an hour, reading from a tattered book of fairy tales, and she leaned against my shoulder as though she had known me all her life. When it was time for me to leave, she looked up at me and asked if I would come back. I promised her I would. I came back every Tuesday and Thursday. I spent every moment I could with Clara, teaching her, reading to her, simply sitting beside her. She was a bright child, curious and thoughtful, and she had a quiet strength that reminded me of myself before the world had broken me. She never asked about her mother or father. I think she had learned early that such questions brought no answers. But she clung to me in a way that made my heart ache, as though she sensed some connection she could not name. The other volunteers noticed. One of them, a kind woman named Mrs. Barrow, remarked that Clara had taken quite a liking to me. She said it was good for the child to have someone who paid her special attention, that most of the children in the orphanage were starved for affection. I smiled and said nothing. I could not tell her the truth. I could not tell anyone. Months passed, and Clara and I grew closer. She began to call me Miss Eleanor, and she would run to me the moment I arrived, her face lighting up with a joy that made the rest of my gray existence bearable. I brought her small gifts when I could afford them, a ribbon for her hair, a sweet from the market. I told myself I was simply being kind, that any volunteer would do the same. But I knew I was lying. I was trying to be her mother in the only way I could. It was in the early spring of Clara's 6th year that everything changed. The matron announced that the orphanage would be receiving a visit from a patron, a nobleman who supported the institution with generous donations. She said his name, and my blood turned to ice. The Duke of Winterbourne. Alexander was coming here, to this place. He would see Clara, and I would see him for the first time in 6 years. I considered fleeing, never returning, but I could not abandon Clara again. I could not leave her to face this alone, even if she did not know what it meant. So I came on the appointed day, my hands shaking, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I told myself he would not recognize me. I was thinner now, worn by years of hardship, my hair streaked with gray though I was only 25. I dressed in the plainest gown I owned and kept my eyes downcast. I would be invisible, just another volunteer among many. The Duke arrived in the late morning, accompanied by the local magistrate and the chairman of the orphanage's board of trustees. I heard his voice before I saw him, that deep, measured tone that had once spoken my name with something like tenderness. I pressed myself into a corner of the room, my back to the wall, and watched as he entered. He had not changed. 6 years, and he looked exactly as I remembered. Tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples, his face as stern and handsome as ever. He moved through the room with the same controlled grace, speaking to the matron, nodding at the children. He did not smile. Alexander never smiled in public. And then his eyes fell on Clara. She was standing near the window, holding a book I had given her the week before. She looked up at him with those wide gray eyes, and I saw him freeze. For a moment, just a moment, his composure cracked. He stared at her as though he had seen a ghost. Then his face closed again, smooth and unreadable. He walked toward her, slowly, and knelt down so that he was at her level. He asked her name. She told him, her voice steady and clear. He asked her how old she was. She said she was 6. He nodded, and I saw his hand tremble slightly as he reached out and touched her cheek just once, very gently. I could not breathe. I could not move. He saw it. He saw himself in her face. I did not know if he understood, if he had made the connection, but I saw the recognition in his eyes, the shock. He stood and turned away, speaking in low tones to the matron. I caught fragments of the conversation. He asked about Clara's history, where she had come from, who had brought her to the orphanage. The matron said she had been left as an infant, that no information about her parents was known. He nodded, his face grave, and said he would like to make a special provision for her education. Then he looked up, and his eyes met mine across the room. For a long, terrible moment, we stared at each other. I saw the exact instant he recognized me. His face went white, then flooded with color. His mouth opened as though he would speak, but no words came. I turned and fled, my vision blurred with tears, my breath coming in gasps. I ran from the orphanage, down the street, into the narrow alleys of the market town, and I did not stop until my legs gave out beneath me. I collapsed against a wall and wept. He had seen me, he had seen Clara, and now, God help us all, the truth was about to come crashing down on all of us. I did not return to the orphanage for a week. I told myself I was being a coward, and I was right, but fear had taken root in my chest, and I could not dislodge it. Alexander had seen me. He had seen Clara. The two truths he had refused to believe 6 years ago were now standing before him, undeniable and devastating. I did not know what he would do with that knowledge, and the not knowing was a special kind of torture. I went to work at the seamstress shop each day, my hands moving mechanically over fabric and thread, while my mind spun in endless circles. I imagined him coming to find me, demanding answers, accusing me of some new deception. I imagined him taking Clara away, claiming her as his heir and shutting me out forever. I imagined him doing nothing at all, turning his back on both of us, just as he had turned his back on me that terrible night. Each possibility was worse than the last. On the 8th day, I received a letter. It was delivered to the shop by a liveried servant, a young man in the Duke's colors who handed it to me without expression and left before I could speak. My hands shook as I broke the seal. The paper was heavy, expensive, embossed with the winter-born crest. The handwriting was Alexander's, that strong, angular script I had once known so well. The letter was brief. He requested that I meet him at the Rose and Crown, a respectable inn on the edge of town, at 3 o'clock the following afternoon. He assured me that the meeting would be private, and that he meant me no harm. He signed it simply with his initials, no title, no endearment. I read it 3 times, searching for some hint of his feelings, but the words were as cold and formal as a business correspondence. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my narrow bed and watched the shadows move across the ceiling, trying to prepare myself for what was to come. What could I possibly say to him? How could I explain 6 years of silence, 6 years of letting him believe a lie? I had tried to tell him the truth that night, but he had not listened. Would he listen now? The next afternoon, I dressed in my best gown, a simple gray silk that had once been fine, but was now worn at the seams. I pinned my hair up carefully and studied my reflection in the small mirror above my washstand. I looked older than my years, tired and faded. I wondered if he would see any trace of the girl he had married, or if that girl was gone forever. I arrived at the Rose and Crown precisely at 3. The innkeeper, a portly man with kind eyes, directed me to a private parlor on the upper floor. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step an effort. When I reached the door, I paused, my hand on the latch, and said a silent prayer for strength. Then I pushed it open and stepped inside. Alexander was standing by the window, his back to me, looking out over the street below. He turned when he heard me enter, and for a moment we simply stared at each other. The years fell away, and I was 19 again, standing in the drawing room at Winterbourne on the day he had asked me to be his wife. But the moment passed, and reality crashed back. We were strangers now, bound by nothing but a shared past, and a child neither of us knew how to claim. He gestured to a chair by the fire, and I sat, grateful for something to do with my trembling hands. He remained standing, his posture rigid, his face carefully composed. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled. He said my name. Just that. Eleanor. Not Lady Eleanor, not Duchess, just my given name. And it sounded strange coming from his lips after so many years. He asked if I had been well. I almost laughed at the absurdity of the question, but I swallowed the hysteria and said I had managed. He nodded as though I had confirmed something he already knew. Then he asked about Clara. He asked if she was his daughter. I looked at him, at the tension in his jaw, the shadows under his eyes, and I told him the truth. I said, yes. She was his. She had always been his. I had tried to tell him that night, but he had not wanted to hear it. His face twisted, and for a moment I thought he might shout, might rage at me the way he had raged 6 years ago. But he did not. Instead, he sank into the chair across from me and put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook, and I realized with shock that he was weeping. Alexander, who had always been so controlled, so impenetrable, was crying in front of me. I did not know what to do. Part of me wanted to go to him, to touch his shoulder, to offer some comfort. But I remained frozen in my chair, watching him struggle with emotions he had kept locked away for so long. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red and his face was ravaged. He asked me why I had not told him, why I had not fought harder to make him believe me. I felt anger rise in my throat, hot and bitter. I told him I had tried. I had begged him to listen, had pleaded with him to believe me. But he had chosen to trust his sister over his wife. He had thrown me out into the night, pregnant and defenseless, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. What else could I have done? He flinched as though I had struck him. He said he had been a fool. He said Catherine had lied to him, had fabricated evidence, had poisoned his mind against me. He said he had discovered the truth 2 years ago, when Catherine had attempted the same scheme against another woman, a young cousin who had come to stay at Winterbourne. The girl had been clever enough to prove her innocence, and Catherine's machinations had been exposed. Alexander had confronted his sister, and she had confessed everything. The letter she had shown him, the one she claimed was proof of my infidelity, had been a forgery. The servants she had bribed to speak against me had recanted their testimony. Everything had been a lie, calculated and cruel, because Catherine had wanted me gone. She had never approved of our marriage, had never accepted a vicar's daughter as the Duchess of Winterbourne. I listened to this with a kind of numb detachment. So I had been right all along. I had been innocent, and he had destroyed me anyway. I asked him what he had done to Catherine. He said he had sent her away, cut her off from the family, forbidden her to use the Hargrave name. It was a harsh punishment, but it seemed insufficient to me. She had ruined my life, had stolen my child from me, and she had been merely exiled to live comfortably on some remote estate. He said he had tried to find me. For 2 years, he had searched, hiring investigators, following every lead. But I had disappeared completely, and he had begun to fear I was dead. He had mourned me, he said. He had regretted his actions every day, had lain awake at night remembering the look on my face when he had turned me away. He had been so certain of my guilt, and when the truth came out, it had nearly destroyed him. I did not know what to say to that. His guilt, his regret, meant nothing to me. They could not undo the past. They could not give me back the years I had lost, the time with my daughter that I would never have. I told him this, my voice flat and hard. I told him he had made his choice, and we had all lived with the consequences. He stood abruptly and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. He was silent for a long time, and I waited, unsure of what would come next. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and strained. He said he wanted to acknowledge Clara as his daughter. He wanted to bring her to Winterbourne, to give her the life she deserved, the name and position that were rightfully hers. He said he would provide for her education, her future, everything. I felt my heart clench. Of course he wanted Clara. She was his heir, the child he had longed for. But what about me? Was I to remain invisible, a shameful secret, while he played the doting father? I asked him where I fit into this plan. Would I be allowed to see her? Would I be permitted to be part of her life? He turned to face me, and I saw the conflict in his eyes. He said it was complicated. Society believed I had been unfaithful, that I had been cast out in disgrace. If he suddenly reinstated me as his wife, there would be questions, scandal. It would damage Clara's prospects, taint her before she even had a chance. He said he would provide for me, of course. He would settle an income on me, ensure I was comfortable. But publicly, we would have to maintain the fiction of our separation. I stood, my legs unsteady, but my voice strong. I told him I did not want his money. I told him I had survived 6 years without him, and I would continue to survive. But I would not give up Clara. I would not stand aside and let him take her from me again. If he wanted to acknowledge her, he would have to acknowledge me as well. I would not be erased from my daughter's life to preserve his reputation. His face hardened. He said I was being unreasonable. He said he was trying to do what was best for Clara, to give her opportunities I could never provide. He said I was thinking of myself, not of her. That was when I lost my composure. I told him I had thought of nothing but Clara for 6 years. I had given birth to her alone, in a freezing stable loft, with no one to help me but a kind stranger. I had held her for 3 days, memorizing every detail of her face, knowing I would have to let her go. I had left her at the orphanage, not because I did not love her, but because I loved her too much to condemn her to a life of poverty and shame. I had volunteered at that orphanage for months, just to be near her, to see her smile, to hear her voice. I had been her mother in the only way I could, and now he wanted to take her from me, to play the magnanimous father while I disappeared into the shadows. I would not do it. I could not. He stared at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. Perhaps he had not understood, until that moment, what I had endured. Perhaps he had not truly grasped the depth of my sacrifice. He said my name again, softly this time, and took a step toward me. But I held up my hand to stop him. I told him I would agree to his plan on one condition. I would allow him to take Clara to Winterbourne, to raise her as his daughter, but I would come as well. Not as his wife, not publicly. I would come as her governess, or her companion, some position that would allow me to be near her without raising suspicion. I would be part of her daily life, and he would not interfere. If he could not agree to that, then he would have to fight me for her, and I would tell anyone who would listen the truth of what had happened. It was a gamble. I had no real power, no means to enforce my demands. But I saw the desperation in his eyes, the need to make amends, and I knew he would not risk losing Clara by refusing me. He was silent for a long time, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. He said he would agree, but there would be conditions. I would have to be discreet, to maintain the appearance of propriety. I would have to accept that Clara would be raised as a lady, groomed for a future far above my own station. And I would have to allow him to be her father, to have a place in her life that was equal to mine. I agreed. What choice did I have? At least this way, I would not lose her entirely. I would be able to watch her grow, to guide her, to be part of her world, even if I could never claim her as my own. We made the arrangements quickly, efficiently, like two business partners negotiating a contract. Alexander would speak to the orphanage, make the necessary donations and arrangements to have Clara released into his care. He would tell the matron that he had taken a particular interest in the child and wished to provide for her education. It would not be questioned. Wealthy patrons often took promising children under their wing. I would be introduced as Miss Gray, a distant relation of the family who had been hired as Clara's companion and tutor. It was a plausible fiction, and one that would raise few eyebrows. He asked when I could be ready to leave. I told him I would need a few days to settle my affairs, to give notice at the shop. He nodded and said he would send a carriage for me at the end of the week. Then he did something unexpected. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather purse, which he placed on the table between us. He said it was for any expenses I might incur, and that I should not hesitate to use it. I stared at the purse, at the money I had sworn I would not take from him, and felt my resolve waver. Pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. I took the purse and slipped it into my pocket without a word. As I turned to leave, he called my name one more time. I looked back at him, and for a moment I saw the man I had married, the man who had held my hand in the darkness and made me believe in happiness. He said he was sorry. He said it simply, without elaboration, but I heard the weight of those two words, the years of regret compressed into a single breath. I told him I knew. Then I walked out of the parlor and did not look back. The days that followed were a blur of activity. I gave notice at the seamstress shop, packed my few belongings, and said goodbye to the small room that had been my home for the past year. Mrs. Barrow, the volunteer from the orphanage, sought me out to say she had heard I was leaving town to take a position with a noble family. She said she was happy for me, that it was a wonderful opportunity. I smiled and thanked her, and did not correct her assumptions. On the appointed day, a carriage arrived at my lodgings. It was a fine carriage, well sprung and comfortable, with the Winterbourne crest discreetly covered. A footman helped me inside and placed my small trunk in the boot. As we rolled through the streets of the market town and out into the countryside, I felt as though I were being carried back in time, back to the girl I had been before everything fell apart. But I was not that girl anymore. I was harder now, sharper, shaped by loss and survival. We arrived at Winterbourne Hall in the late afternoon. The sight of it took my breath away. I had thought I had forgotten, that time had dulled the memories, but seeing those gray stone walls and ancient oaks again was like a physical blow. This had been my home. I had walked these grounds, slept in these rooms, tried so hard to belong here, and I had been cast out as though I were nothing. The carriage stopped at a side entrance, not the grand front doors I had once used. A housekeeper, a stern woman I did not recognize, met me and led me through a series of back corridors to a small suite of rooms in the east wing. She informed me that these would be my quarters and that I would take my meals in the nursery with Miss Clara. She did not ask questions, and I did not offer explanations. I was a servant now, or near enough, and servants did not require personal histories. Clara arrived the next day. I watched from my window as the carriage pulled up to the front entrance and Alexander stepped out, then turned to help a small figure down. Clara looked tiny and uncertain, clutching a worn doll to her chest as she stared up at the massive house. My heart twisted. I wanted to run to her, to sweep her into my arms, but I forced myself to wait. Patience, discretion. Those were the rules of this new arrangement. I was summoned to the nursery an hour later. Clara was sitting on a small sofa, still holding her doll, looking lost and frightened. Alexander was speaking to her in low, gentle tones, trying to reassure her. When I entered, she looked up and her face transformed. She cried out my name, Miss Eleanor, and ran to me. I knelt and caught her in my arms, and she clung to me as though I were the only solid thing in a shifting world. Alexander watched us, his expression unreadable. Then he said he would leave us to get settled. He told Clara that I would be staying with her, that I would be her companion and teacher. She nodded, her face pressed against my shoulder, and I felt her relax. She trusted me. In this vast, strange place, I was the one familiar thing. When Alexander left, I sat with Clara and told her about Winterbourne, about the gardens and the library, and all the wonderful things she would discover here. I told her that the Duke was a kind man who wanted to take care of her, to give her a good life. I did not tell her he was her father. That truth would have to wait. For now, it was enough that she was here, safe and warm, and that I could hold her hand and smooth her hair and be the mother I had never been allowed to be. That night, after Clara had fallen asleep in her new bed, I stood at the window of my room and looked out over the grounds. Somewhere in this house, Alexander was alone with his thoughts, grappling with the same tangled emotions that kept me awake. We were bound together now, whether we liked it or not, by the child who slept down the hall. I did not know what the future held, did not know if we could ever find our way back to each other. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never leave Clara again. Whatever it cost me, whatever sacrifices I had to make, I would be here for her. Always. The first weeks at Winterbourne Hall were a careful dance of pretense and proximity. I moved through the house like a shadow, always present but never acknowledged beyond the boundaries of the nursery and schoolroom. The servants treated me with polite indifference, neither friendly nor hostile, simply accepting that I was Miss Grey, the companion hired to look after the Duke's ward. They did not know I had once been mistress of this house, had once given orders in these very halls. I was grateful for their ignorance. It made the charade easier to maintain. Clara adjusted to her new life with the resilience of childhood. She was delighted by everything, by the vast rooms and the gardens, by the endless supply of books in the library, by the fine dresses that appeared in her wardrobe as if by magic. She asked me once why the Duke had chosen her, why he had brought her from the orphanage to live in such a grand place. I told her he had seen something special in her, that he believed she deserved a better life than the one she had known. It was the truth, or at least part of it. She seemed satisfied with the answer, and I was grateful she did not press further. Alexander kept his distance at first. He would visit the nursery in the evenings, spending an hour with Clara before her bedtime. He would ask about her lessons, listen to her read, play simple games with her. He was gentle with her, patient in a way I had never seen him be with anyone. Watching them together was both beautiful and painful. I saw the love in his eyes when he looked at her, the wonder and the regret. He was trying to make up for lost time, to be the father he had never had the chance to be. And Clara, starved for affection as all orphans are, responded to his attention with shy smiles and growing trust. But he barely looked at me during those visits. When he addressed me, it was always formally, always as Miss Grey. He would ask if Clara had been well behaved, if her lessons were progressing satisfactorily, and I would answer in the same measured tones. We were strangers performing a carefully scripted play, and neither of us dared to step outside our assigned roles. It was lonely, being so close to him and yet so impossibly far. I would lie awake at night, listening to the familiar sounds of the house, remembering what it had been like to share his bed, to feel his arms around me. I remembered the way he had kissed me on our wedding night, tentative and reverent, as though I were something precious. I remembered the mornings when I would wake to find him already dressed, standing by the window with a cup of tea. and how he would turn and smile at me in the early light. Those memories were like ghosts, haunting me in the darkness. A month after our arrival, Alexander summoned me to his study. It was the first time I had been in that room since my return, and the sight of it brought a rush of memories. This was where he had told me he loved me, or as close as he had ever come to saying the words. This was where we had discussed the running of the estate, where I had sat beside him and felt like a true partner. And this was where, I imagined, he had sat after sending me away, believing himself justified in his cruelty. He was standing behind his desk when I entered, a sheaf of papers in his hands. He gestured for me to sit, and I did, folding my hands in my lap and waiting for him to speak. He said he wanted to discuss Clara's future. He had been thinking about her education, about what she would need to take her place in society. She would require more than I could teach her alone. He proposed hiring additional tutors for music, dancing, French. She would need to learn all the accomplishments expected of a young lady of good family. I agreed, though it stung to admit that I could not give Clara everything she needed. I had been well educated for a vicar's daughter, but my knowledge was limited. I could teach her literature and history, basic mathematics and geography, but I could not transform her into the polished aristocrat Alexander envisioned. If that was what he wanted for her, he would need help beyond what I could provide. He seemed relieved by my acquiescence. Then he said something that surprised me. He said he valued my presence in Clara's life, that he could see how much she depended on me, how much she loved me. He said he did not want to disrupt that bond, that whatever else happened, I would always have a place here, as long as Clara needed me. It was a strange kind of reassurance, both generous and limiting. He was telling me I was necessary, but only in relation to Clara. I was not here for myself, not as his wife, or even as a person in my own right. I was here because our daughter needed me. I thanked him quietly and said I understood. There was nothing else to say. As I rose to leave, he called my name. Not Miss Gray, but Eleanor. I froze, my hand on the door handle. He said there was something he needed to tell me, something he should have said before. He said he had not been honest when he told me he had only learned of Catherine's lies 2 years ago. The truth was, he had begun to suspect something was wrong within months of sending me away. Small inconsistencies in Catherine's story, odd reactions from the servants who had supposedly witnessed my indiscretions. But he had been too proud, too stubborn, to admit he might have been wrong. He had told himself I was guilty because it was easier than facing the truth, easier than acknowledging that he had destroyed the one person who had truly loved him. I turned to face him, and I saw the shame in his eyes, the raw self-loathing. He said he had been a coward. He said he had let his pride and his fear rule him, and it had cost us everything. He said he did not expect me to forgive him, did not even think he deserved forgiveness. But he wanted me to know that he understood the magnitude of what he had done and that he would spend the rest of his life trying to make amends. I looked at him for a long moment, this man who had been everything to me and then nothing, and I felt something crack inside my chest. I wanted to rage at him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain I had endured. But I was too tired, too worn down by years of grief and survival. Instead, I simply said that the past was the past and we could not change it. All we could do was try to build something better for Clara. Then I left the study before he could see the tears that were starting to blur my vision. The tutors arrived over the following weeks. Monsieur Dubois for French, a thin, fastidious man who spoke with Clara in rapid musical phrases until she was giggling and responding in kind. Miss Hartley for music, a stern woman with strong hands who taught Clara to coax beauty from the pianoforte. Madame Laurent for dancing and deportment, an elegant older woman who moved like a queen and insisted that Clara learn to curtsy with the same precision. I sat in on the lessons when I could, marveling at how quickly Clara absorbed everything. She was a bright child, eager to please, and she worked hard to master each new skill. But it was in our private lessons, the ones I conducted in the mornings before the other tutors arrived, that Clara truly blossomed. We would read together, discussing stories and poems, exploring ideas. I taught her to think critically, to question, to form her own opinions. These were not skills that polite society valued in young ladies, but I did not care. I wanted Clara to have the kind of mind that could not be easily deceived or controlled. I wanted her to be strong in ways I had not been strong. One morning, as we sat in the schoolroom with a volume of Shakespeare open between us, Clara asked me about love. We had been reading Romeo and Juliet, and she was troubled by the tragedy of it, by the senselessness of the lovers' deaths. She asked me if love was always so painful, if it always led to sorrow. I did not know how to answer her. How could I explain that love was both the most beautiful and the most devastating thing in the world? That it could lift you up and destroy you in equal measure? I told her that love was complicated, that it required trust and honesty and courage. I told her that sometimes people made mistakes, that they hurt the ones they loved without meaning to. But I also told her that love was worth the risk, that a life without love was no life at all. She was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. Then she said she thought the Duke loved her, that she could tell by the way he looked at her. She said she loved him too, even though she had only known him a short time. Then she said something that made my heart stop. She said she wished I were her mother, that she could not imagine loving anyone more than she loved me. I pulled her into my arms and held her tight, unable to speak. I wanted to tell her the truth, wanted to say that I was her mother, that I had always been her mother, that I had never stopped loving her for a single moment. But I could not. The words caught in my throat, trapped by the promises I had made, by the need to protect her from scandal and shame. So I simply held her and whispered that I loved her too, more than she could ever know. That evening, Alexander came to the nursery as usual. Clara ran to him and told him about our lesson, about Romeo and Juliet and the nature of love. He listened with a small smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a way I remembered from long ago. When she finished, he glanced at me, and for a moment our eyes met. There was a question in his gaze, something unspoken and uncertain. I looked away, unable to hold that gaze without breaking. After Clara had gone to bed, Alexander asked if he might speak with me. We stood in the corridor outside the nursery, the lamps casting soft pools of light on the polished floors. He said he had been thinking about what Clara had said, about love and trust. He said he wondered if it was possible to rebuild something that had been so thoroughly broken, or if some things, once destroyed, could never be made whole again. I told him I did not know. I told him I had spent 6 years believing I would never see him again, never speak his name, never feel anything for him but bitterness. But being here, seeing him with Clara, watching him try so hard to be a good father, had stirred something in me I thought was long dead. I did not know if it was forgiveness or simply exhaustion, the slow erosion of anger over time. I did not know if we could ever be what we once were, or if we even should try. The people we had been were gone, replaced by these wary, wounded versions of ourselves. He reached out, hesitantly, and took my hand. It was the first time he had touched me in 6 years, and the contact sent a shock through my entire body. His hand was warm and solid, achingly familiar. He said he did not expect me to forget what he had done, did not expect me to love him again, but he wanted me to know that he had never stopped loving me, not even when he had believed the worst of me. His love had been twisted by suspicion and pride, poisoned by Catherine's lies, but it had never truly died. It had simply gone into hiding, waiting for the day when he would be brave enough to reclaim it. I did not pull my hand away. I stood there in the dim corridor, feeling the warmth of his skin against mine, and I let myself remember what it had been like to be loved by this man. It had not been perfect. He had been reserved, slow to express his feelings, often distant and absorbed in his duties. but when he had looked at me, truly looked at me, I had felt seen in a way I had never been seen before or since. I had felt valued, cherished, safe. And then I had lost it all, and the loss had nearly killed me. I told him I did not know if I could love him again. I told him I did not know if I had the strength to risk that kind of pain a second time. But I also told him I did not hate him, not anymore. I was tired of hating, tired of carrying the weight of old grievances. Perhaps, in time, we could find a way to be something other than enemies. Perhaps we could learn to be friends, for Clara's sake, if not our own. He nodded slowly, and I saw relief in his eyes. He said that was enough, more than he had any right to hope for. He squeezed my hand once, gently, and then let go. We stood in silence for a moment longer, and then he bid me good night and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. I returned to my room and sat by the window, staring out at the moonlit gardens. Something had shifted between us. Some invisible barrier had begun to crack. I did not know what it meant, did not know where it would lead. But for the first time since returning to Winterbourne, I felt a flicker of something that might, in time, become hope. The weeks turned into months. Summer faded into autumn, and the grounds of Winterbourne transformed into a riot of gold and crimson. Clara thrived under the attention and care lavished upon her. She grew taller, more confident, her laughter ringing through the halls. The servants adored her, and even the stern housekeeper had been seen smiling at her antics. She was becoming the Lady Alexander envisioned, but she had not lost the sweetness and curiosity that made her who she was. Alexander and I continued our cautious dance, neither advancing nor retreating, simply existing in a state of careful equilibrium. We spoke more often now, conversations that went beyond Clara's lessons and schedules. He told me about the estate, about the challenges he faced managing the lands and tenants. I told him about the books I was reading with Clara, about her progress and her questions. We did not speak of the past, did not revisit the wounds that had not yet fully healed. But there was a growing ease between us, a tentative comfort that felt almost like friendship. One afternoon in late October, Alexander invited Clara and me to walk with him in the gardens. It was a clear, crisp day, the kind where the air smells of wood smoke and fallen leaves. Clara ran ahead, exclaiming over the colors, while Alexander and I followed at a slower pace. We talked about inconsequential things, the weather, the upcoming harvest festival, the new foal in the stables. It was pleasant, ordinary, the kind of conversation any married couple might have on an autumn afternoon. Then Clara called out to us. She had found a bench by the old fountain, the one that had been my favorite spot when I had lived here as his wife. She wanted us to sit with her, to tell her stories about the statues and the roses. We sat, one on each side of her, and I felt the warmth of Alexander's arm just inches from mine. Clara leaned against me, content, and I looked across her head to meet Alexander's gaze. In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the gardens and the laughter of our daughter, I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt whole, not healed perhaps, not entirely free of the scars the past had left, but whole nonetheless. And when Alexander smiled at me, a real smile that reached his eyes, I smiled back. It was a beginning, small, fragile, uncertain. But it was a beginning, and that was more than I had dared to hope for. As we walked back to the house, Clara between us holding both our hands, I thought about the long road that had brought us here. The pain, the loss, the years of separation and silence. I thought about the night he had sent me away, and the night I had left Clara at the orphanage, and all the nights in between when I had believed I would never be happy again. And I realized that happiness was not something you found once and kept forever. It was something you built, piece by piece, from the wreckage of what had been lost. It was something you chose every day, despite the fear and the doubt. I looked down at Clara, at her bright eyes and her trusting smile, and I knew that whatever happened between Alexander and me, we had given her something precious. We had given her a home, a family, a future, and perhaps, in giving her those things, we had found a way to give them to ourselves as well. That night, after Clara was asleep, Alexander came to my door. He did not knock, simply stood in the hallway, waiting. I opened the door and looked at him, at the question in his eyes. He said he knew it was late, that he should not disturb me, but he had something he wanted to say, and he could not wait any longer. He told me that he had been thinking about our conversation, about friendship and forgiveness, and the possibility of something more. He said he did not know if we could ever go back to what we were, but he did not want to go back. He wanted to move forward, to build something new. He said he knew he had no right to ask anything of me, that I owed him nothing, but he wanted me to know that he was willing to wait, for as long as it took, for me to decide if I could ever trust him again. He said he would be patient, would be whatever I needed him to be, because losing me once had taught him the value of what we had shared. I stood in the doorway, feeling the weight of his words, the sincerity behind them. I told him I could not make him any promises. I told him I did not know if my heart was capable of loving him the way I once had, if too much had been broken to ever truly mend. But I also told him I was willing to try, for Clara, and perhaps in time, for myself as well. He nodded, and I saw hope bloom in his eyes, tentative and fragile but real. He thanked me, his voice rough with emotion, and then he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the faint, persistent flutter of possibility that had taken root in my chest. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart beating fast. I did not know what the future held. I did not know if Alexander and I could truly find our way back to each other, or if we would always be haunted by the ghosts of what we had been. But I knew one thing with certainty. I was no longer the broken girl who had been cast out into the night 6 years ago. I was a woman who had survived, who had fought her way back from the edge of despair. And if I chose to take this chance, to open my heart one more time, it would be on my own terms, in my own time. For now, that was enough. Winter came to Winterbourne with its usual severity, blanketing the grounds in snow and turning the ancient oaks into skeletal sentinels. The house grew colder, despite the roaring fires in every hearth, and we drew closer together against the chill. Clara delighted in the snow, dragging Alexander and me outside to build snowmen and throw snowballs with an enthusiasm that was impossible to resist. I watched her with him, their laughter mingling in the crisp air, and I felt the walls around my heart continue their slow crumbling. Alexander was true to his word. He did not press me, did not demand more than I was willing to give. But his presence was constant, steady, a quiet reassurance that he would be there when I was ready. We took to having tea together in the evenings after Clara had gone to bed, sitting in the small parlor adjacent to the nursery and talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his childhood, about the weight of expectations that had been placed on him from birth, about the loneliness of being the Duke. I told him about my life after I had left Winterbourne, about the fear and the struggle and the small kindnesses that had kept me alive. These conversations were a kind of healing, a way of bridging the chasm that had opened between us. We were learning each other again, discovering who we had become in the years we had been apart. And slowly, painfully, I began to trust him. Not completely, not without reservation, but enough to believe that he meant what he said, that his regret was genuine. It was during one of these evening conversations, in the dead of winter, when the wind howled outside and the fire crackled in the grate, that he told me about Catherine. I had not asked, had not wanted to reopen that particular wound, but he needed to speak of it, to make me understand the full extent of her betrayal. He said Catherine had always been difficult, jealous and manipulative even as a child. Their mother had died when Catherine was young, and their father had spoiled her, unable to deny her anything. She had grown up believing the world owed her whatever she wanted, and when Alexander became Duke, She had expected to reign as the mistress of Winterbourne. My arrival had shattered that expectation. She had seen me as an interloper, a nobody who had stolen what should have been hers. The lies she had told were elaborate and carefully constructed. She had forged letters, bribed servants, even gone so far as to arrange for a man to be seen entering and leaving the grounds at odd hours, making it appear as though I had been conducting an affair. Alexander had been so blinded by his trust in his sister, so convinced that family would never lie to him, that he had believed every word. It was only when Catherine had attempted the same scheme with his young cousin that the truth had come out. The cousin had been clever enough to keep detailed records of her whereabouts, to gather testimony from multiple witnesses. When confronted with irrefutable proof of Catherine's machinations, she had laughed and admitted everything. She said she had no regrets, that I had deserved to be cast out, that I had never been worthy of the Hargrave name. Alexander's voice shook as he told me this. He said he had wanted to have Catherine arrested, to see her prosecuted for what she had done. But scandal would have destroyed not just Catherine, but the entire family, and he could not bring himself to do it. Instead, he had exiled her to a remote estate in Scotland, cut off her allowance to the bare minimum, and forbidden her to ever set foot in Winterbourne again. It was a punishment, but as I had said before, it seemed insufficient for the magnitude of her crimes. I asked him if he had told her about Clara, if Catherine knew that her lies had not only destroyed his marriage, but had also robbed him of 6 years with his daughter. He said he had not. He said he could not bear to give her the satisfaction of knowing how thoroughly she had succeeded in ruining our lives. Besides, what good would it do? Catherine had no conscience, no capacity for remorse. Telling her would change nothing. I understood his reasoning, but part of me wished she could know. I wished she could see Clara, could see what her cruelty had cost. But perhaps it was better this way. Catherine was in the past, and we were trying to build a future. There was no point in letting her poison our lives any further. As winter deepened, Clara began to ask questions about her parentage. She was 7 now, old enough to wonder why she had been in an orphanage, why she had no memories of a mother or father before the Duke had brought her to Winterbourne. I had known this day would come, but I was not prepared for the ache in my chest when she asked me, her gray eyes wide and serious, if I knew who her real parents were. I told her I did not know, which was not precisely a lie. I did not know who she believed her parents to be, but I promised her that whoever they were, they had loved her very much. I told her that sometimes circumstances made it impossible for parents to keep their children, but that did not mean the love was any less real. She seemed to accept this, but I could see the sadness in her face, the longing for answers I could not give her. That night, I went to Alexander and told him we needed to talk about Clara's questions. I said she was getting older, that she would not be satisfied with vague reassurances forever. At some point, she would need to know the truth, or at least some version of it. We needed to decide what we would tell her, and when. Alexander agreed. He said he had been thinking about the same thing. He proposed that we tell Clara the truth gradually, starting with the revelation that he was her father. We could say that her mother had died, that he had not known of Clara's existence until recently. It was not the full truth, but it was close enough to be believable, and it would give Clara the security of knowing she belonged to him, that she had a father who loved her. I asked what would happen to me in this story. Would I remain Miss Grey, the hired companion, while Clara learned to think of Alexander as her only true parent? The thought was unbearable, but I did not see another way. Revealing that I was her mother would mean revealing our entire sordid history, the accusation of infidelity, the disgrace. Clara was too young to understand such complexities. It would only confuse and hurt her. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Then he said there might be another way. He said that in time, after Clara had accepted him as her father, we could tell her that I was her mother as well. We could say that there had been a misunderstanding, that circumstances had forced us apart, but that we had found our way back to each other for her sake. It would not be the whole truth, but it would be enough. And if we presented it carefully, with love and reassurance, Clara would accept it. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could give Clara the truth without destroying her innocence, without burdening her with the weight of our mistakes. But I was afraid. I was afraid that Clara would feel betrayed, that she would wonder why we had lied to her for so long. I was afraid that she would look at me differently, that the love and trust we had built would crumble under the weight of revelation. Alexander took my hand, the gesture now familiar and comforting. He said we would do this together, that we would protect Clara no matter what. He said he trusted me to know when the time was right, and that he would follow my lead. It was a gift, that trust, and I held it carefully, knowing how precious it was. We decided to wait until spring to tell Clara that Alexander was her father. It would give her time to settle more fully into life at Winterbourne, to feel secure in her place here. And it would give me time to prepare myself for the shift in our family dynamic, for the moment when I would have to step back and let Alexander claim his role in Clara's life. But as the weeks passed, something unexpected happened. Alexander and I grew closer, not just as co-parents, but as companions, as friends. The tea in the evenings became the part of the day I looked forward to most. We talked about books, about politics, about the running of the estate. He asked my opinion on matters of business, and he listened when I offered suggestions. It was the kind of partnership I had dreamed of when I had first married him, the kind of equal footing I had never quite achieved before Catherine's interference. And slowly, so slowly I almost did not notice it happening, I began to fall in love with him again. Not the desperate, all-consuming love of my youth, but something deeper, more resilient. A love built on understanding and shared sacrifice, on the recognition that we had both been broken and were both trying to heal. I did not tell him. I was not ready for that. But I felt it growing inside me, warm and insistent, and I did not try to stop it. One evening in early March, when the snow had begun to melt and the first hints of spring were visible in the budding trees, Alexander asked if I would like to take a walk with him after Clara had gone to bed. I agreed, curious and a little nervous. We bundled up against the lingering chill and walked out into the gardens, our breath misting in the air. He led me to the old fountain, the one where we had sat with Clara months before. The moon was full, casting silver light over the grounds, and everything looked magical, transformed. We stood side by side, not speaking, simply taking in the beauty of the night. Then he turned to me and said he had something he needed to tell me. He said he had been trying to be patient, to give me the time and space I needed, but he could not keep silent any longer. He said he loved me. He had always loved me, even in the darkest moments when he had believed the worst of me. And now, having the chance to know me again, to see the strength and grace with which I had endured so much, he loved me more than ever. He said he did not expect me to say it back, did not expect anything from me at all. He simply needed me to know. I looked at him, at the vulnerability in his face, and I felt my carefully constructed defenses shatter. I told him I loved him too. I had not wanted to, had fought against it, but it was the truth. I loved him, and I was terrified of what that meant, of the risk I was taking by opening my heart to him again. But I was also tired of being afraid, tired of living in the shadow of the past. If there was any chance of happiness, any possibility of building a real family with him and Clara, I had to take it. He reached out and cupped my face in his hands, his touch gentle and reverent. He asked if he could kiss me, and I nodded, unable to speak. When his lips met mine, it was like coming home after a long journey. The kiss was slow and tender, full of promise and apology and hope. When we finally pulled apart, we were both trembling. He asked if I would consider something. He asked if, in time, I would be willing to become his wife again, not just in name, but in truth. He said he understood if I was not ready, that he would wait as long as necessary. but he wanted me to know that his greatest wish was to rebuild what we had lost, to stand beside me as my husband, and to raise Clara together as our daughter. I told him I needed time to think, to be sure. The wounds of the past were still too fresh, the memories of betrayal and abandonment still too vivid. But I also told him I wanted the same thing. I wanted to be a family, a real family, with him and Clara. I just needed to be certain that we could do it right this time, that we would not repeat the mistakes that had destroyed us before. He understood. He promised me that he would spend every day proving that I could trust him, that he would never again let pride or suspicion come between us. He said he would be transparent with me about everything, that there would be no more secrets, no more misunderstandings. We would build our future on a foundation of honesty and communication, and nothing would ever tear us apart again. We walked back to the house hand in hand, and for the first time since returning to Winterbourne, I felt truly at peace. The road ahead would not be easy. There were still so many conversations to be had, so much healing to be done. But we would face it together, and that made all the difference. The next few weeks were a time of quiet joy. Alexander and I continued to grow closer, stealing moments alone when we could, learning to be comfortable with each other in new ways. We were careful to maintain propriety in front of the servants and Clara, but in private, we allowed ourselves the tentative intimacy of a couple falling in love. He would take my hand as we walked, or brush a strand of hair from my face, or simply sit close to me by the fire. These small gestures meant more to me than grand declarations ever could. They were proof that he saw me, that he valued me, that I was no longer alone. Clara noticed the change in us, though she did not fully understand what it meant. She commented once that the Duke and I seemed happy, and that it made her happy too. I hugged her tight and told her that we were happy, that being here with her was the greatest gift we could have asked for. She smiled and went back to her books, content in the knowledge that the people she loved were at peace. It was time, I decided, to tell Clara that Alexander was her father. She was settled, secure, and deeply attached to both of us. She deserved to know the truth, or at least the first part of it. I discussed it with Alexander, and he agreed. We would tell her together on a quiet afternoon when we could give her our full attention and answer whatever questions she had. The day we chose was a Sunday in late March. The weather was mild, and we took Clara to the Rose Garden, the place where Alexander and I had first begun to rebuild our fragile bond. We sat on a bench, Clara between us, and Alexander began to speak. He told her that he had something important to tell her, something he hoped would make her happy. He said that he was not just her guardian or her benefactor. He was her father. Clara stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. She looked from him to me and back again, as if trying to make sense of what she had just heard. She asked if it was true, if he was really her father. He said yes, and that he loved her more than anything in the world. He said he had not known about her when she was born, that circumstances had kept them apart, but that finding her had been the greatest joy of his life. She was silent for a long moment, processing this revelation. Then she asked about her mother. She asked if her mother was alive, if he knew who she was. I felt Alexander tense beside me, and I knew this was the moment I had been dreading. We had agreed to wait before telling her about me, but I could not lie to her, not when she was looking at me with such hope and longing. I took a deep breath and told her the truth. I told her that I was her mother, that I had always been her mother from the moment she was born. I told her that I had loved her every single day of her life, even when we were apart, even when I could not be with her. I told her that leaving her at the orphanage had been the hardest thing I had ever done, but that I had done it because I wanted her to have a chance at a better life than I could give her. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, and then she threw her arms around me and buried her face in my shoulder. She sobbed, great shaking sobs that tore at my heart, and I held her and whispered that I was sorry, that I had never wanted to leave her, that I would never leave her again. Alexander wrapped his arms around both of us, and we sat there in the garden, the three of us clinging to each other, and I felt the last pieces of my broken heart begin to mend. Clara pulled back after a while, her face wet with tears, and asked why we had not told her sooner. I told her we wanted to wait until she was ready, until she felt safe and loved. I told her we were sorry for keeping it from her, but that we had only wanted to protect her. She nodded, sniffling, and then she asked the question I had known was coming. She asked why we had been apart, why I had not been with Alexander when she was born. Alexander and I exchanged a glance, and I knew we had to give her some version of the truth. I told her that there had been a terrible misunderstanding, that someone had lied and made Alexander believe something that was not true. I told her that we had been separated because of those lies, but that we had found our way back to each other because of her. It was a simplified version, stripped of the ugliness and pain, but it was enough for now. Clara was young, and she did not need to know the full extent of the cruelty and betrayal that had torn us apart. What she needed to know was that we loved her, and that we were a family now, truly and completely. She asked if that meant we would all be together from now on, if I would stop being Miss Grey and be her mother, if Alexander would stop being just the Duke and be her father. We told her yes, that was exactly what it meant. She smiled through her tears, a radiant, joyful smile, and said that was what she had wished for, that she had dreamed we could all be a real family. We spent the rest of the afternoon in the garden, answering Clara's questions, reassuring her, letting her adjust to this new reality. By the time we went inside for dinner, she was laughing again, chattering about all the things we would do together as a family. She wanted to know if she could call me Mama, and if she could call Alexander Papa. We told her she could call us whatever felt right to her, and her face lit up with happiness. That night, after Clara had gone to sleep, Alexander came to my room. He did not ask permission, simply walked in and closed the door behind him. He looked at me with such intensity that I could barely breathe. He said that today had changed everything, that we were truly a family now, and that he did not want to wait any longer. He asked me again if I would marry him, if I would be his wife in every sense of the word. I said yes. I said yes because I loved him, because I trusted him, because I believed that we had earned this second chance. I said yes because Clara deserved to grow up with both her parents, united and whole. And I said yes because I was ready, finally, to let go of the past and embrace the future we were building together. He kissed me then, not tentatively as he had before, but with a passion and urgency that took my breath away. It was a kiss that spoke of years of longing and regret, of love that had been buried but never truly lost. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless, and I saw in his eyes a promise of all the days and nights to come. We decided we would remarry quietly, in a small ceremony with only a few trusted witnesses. We would not make a grand announcement, would not invite society's scrutiny. This was for us, for our family, and no one else needed to be part of it. The servants would be told that we had reconciled, that I was no longer Miss Grey, but the Duchess once more. There would be whispers, of course, speculation about what had really happened. But we would face it together, and we would not let anyone take this happiness from us. As I lay in bed that night, Alexander's arms around me for the first time in 7 years, I thought about the long, painful journey that had brought us to this moment. I thought about the girl I had been, the woman I had become, and the family I had fought so hard to reclaim. And I knew, with a certainty that filled my entire being, that we were going to be all right. We had survived the worst, and we had come out stronger on the other side. The future stretched before us, full of possibility and promise. And I was ready, finally, to step into it without fear. Spring arrived in full glory, transforming Winterbourne into a tapestry of color and life. The gardens bloomed with roses and lavender, the orchards blossomed with apple and cherry trees, and the air was filled with birdsong and the scent of fresh earth. It seemed as though the land itself was celebrating our reunion, offering up its beauty as a benediction for our new beginning. Alexander and I were married on a Tuesday morning in the chapel at Winterbourne, with only Clara, the vicar, and Mrs. Humphreys, the housekeeper who had served the family for 40 years, in attendance. I wore a simple gown of cream silk, and Alexander wore his mourning coat, and we stood before the altar and spoke the same vows we had spoken 7 years before. But this time, the words meant something different. This time, we knew the weight of them, the commitment they required, the cost of breaking them. When the vicar pronounced us man and wife, Alexander lifted my hand to his lips and kissed it with such tenderness that tears sprang to my eyes. Clara, who had been fidgeting throughout the ceremony, let out a whoop of joy and ran to embrace us both. We laughed and held her between us, and I felt a completeness I had never dared to hope for again. The servants were informed that afternoon. Mrs. Humphreys made the announcement at the staff meeting, her voice carrying across the servants' hall with practiced authority. She said that His Grace had remarried, that I was now the Duchess of Winterbourne, and that I was to be accorded all the respect and deference due to my position. There were gasps, whispers, sidelong glances. Some of the older servants remembered me from before, and I saw recognition dawning in their faces. But no one questioned the arrangement. The Duke's word was law, and if he chose to remarry his former wife, that was his prerogative. Over the following days, I moved my belongings from the small suite in the East Wing to the Duchess's chambers, the rooms I had occupied during my first marriage. Walking through those doors again was strange, like stepping into a dream half-remembered. The furniture was the same, the heavy curtains and the carved wardrobe and the massive bed with its damask hangings. But I was not the same. The girl who had slept here, who had believed in fairy tales and happy endings, was gone. In her place was a woman who had survived, who had learned that happiness was not given, but earned, built piece by piece from the wreckage of loss. Alexander joined me in those chambers that night, and we consummated our renewed vows with a passion tempered by time and understanding. There was no awkwardness between us, no uncertainty. We knew each other's bodies, yes, but more than that, we knew each other's hearts. We had seen each other at our worst and had chosen each other anyway, and that made everything we shared now infinitely more precious. In the days that followed, we settled into a new rhythm. I resumed the duties of Mistress of Winterbourne, overseeing the household, meeting with the tenants, hosting small gatherings for the local gentry. Alexander consulted me on estate matters, and we made decisions together as equals. Clara thrived under the certainty of having both her parents present and united. She no longer asked questions about the past, content in the knowledge that we were a family and that nothing would separate us again. But there was one conversation we still needed to have, one piece of unfinished business that haunted me: Catherine. I had not spoken her name aloud since returning to Winterbourne, had tried to push thoughts of her from my mind. But she was there, always there, a shadow at the edge of my consciousness. She had destroyed my life once, and though she was exiled now, powerless to harm us, I could not rest until I knew she understood the full magnitude of what she had done. I spoke to Alexander about it one evening as we sat in his study, the room that had once been the site of so much pain and was now a place of shared intimacy. I told him I wanted to write to Catherine. I wanted to tell her about Clara, about what her lies had cost us. I wanted her to know that despite everything she had done, we had survived and rebuilt our lives. I needed her to know that she had not won. Alexander was hesitant. He said Catherine did not deserve to know anything about us, that giving her any information would only feed her twisted satisfaction. But I insisted. I said this was not about her. It was about me, about closing that chapter of my life completely. I needed to confront her, even if only through words on paper, and then I needed to let her go. He relented, though I could see the worry in his eyes. He said I could write to her if I must, but he asked me to let him read the letter before I sent it. I agreed. This was not just my pain, after all. It was his as well, and he had a right to know what I would say. I spent an entire day crafting the letter. I wrote and rewrote, trying to find the right words, the right tone. I did not want to sound vengeful or bitter, though I felt both those things. I wanted to sound strong, triumphant, free. In the end, I kept it simple. I wrote that Alexander and I had reconciled, that we had remarried, and that we were raising our daughter together. I told her that Clara was beautiful and intelligent and kind, everything we could have hoped for. I told her that despite all her efforts to destroy us, we had found our way back to each other, and that our love was stronger now than it had ever been. I told her that I forgave her, not because she deserved forgiveness, but because I refused to carry the burden of hatred any longer. And I told her that I hoped she would find peace, though I doubted she ever would. I showed the letter to Alexander, and he read it in silence, his face grave. When he finished, he looked up at me and said it was perfect. He said it was gracious and dignified, far more than Catherine deserved, but that it spoke to the woman I had become. He said he was proud of me, and those words meant more to me than any grand gesture ever could. We sent the letter, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I did not expect a response, and I did not receive one. Catherine was a closed chapter, a part of my past that I could finally release. Whatever bitterness she carried, whatever regrets she might have, were hers to bear. I was free. Summer came, and with it a letter from Alexander's solicitor. The legal matters surrounding Clara's legitimacy had been finalized. She was now recognized as the legitimate daughter of the Duke and Duchess of Winterbourne, heir to the estate and all its holdings. The paperwork had been complicated, requiring testimony and affidavits and the cooperation of various officials, but Alexander had spared no expense or effort. Clara's future was secure, her position unassailable. We told Clara the news over dinner, and she looked at us with wide, solemn eyes. She asked what it meant to be an heir. We explained that someday when Alexander was gone, Winterbourne would be hers. The house, the lands, the responsibilities, all of it would pass to her. It was a heavy burden for one so young to contemplate, but we assured her that she would not face it alone. We would teach her everything she needed to know, would prepare her to be a wise and compassionate steward of the estate. She asked if that meant she could never leave Winterbourne, if she would always have to stay here. I told her that Winterbourne was her inheritance, but it was not her prison. She could choose her own path, could marry for love if she wished, could travel and see the world. The estate would always be here, waiting for her, but it did not have to define her entire life. She seemed relieved by that, and the conversation turned to lighter topics. But later, when I went to tuck her into bed, she asked me if I was happy. She said she wanted to make sure, because she knew I had been sad for a long time before we came to Winterbourne. I sat on the edge of her bed and took her hand, and I told her the truth. I told her I was happier than I had ever been, that having her and Alexander in my life was everything I had ever wanted. I told her that the sad times had made me stronger, had taught me to appreciate the good when it came. And I told her that she was the greatest gift I had ever received, and that I would love her forever. She smiled and hugged me tight, and I felt the fierce protectiveness of motherhood surge through me. I would do anything for this child, would sacrifice everything to keep her safe and happy. She was the reason I had survived, the reason I had fought my way back from despair. And now she was growing up in a home filled with love and security, exactly as I had always dreamed. As the months passed, life at Winterbourne settled into a comfortable routine. Alexander and I hosted our first formal dinner as a reunited couple, inviting the local nobility and prominent families. There were whispers, of course, speculation about our history and the nature of our reconciliation. But we faced the gossip with united front, and gradually the talk died down. People saw that we were happy, that Clara was thriving, and they accepted the situation because there was no scandal to uncover, no drama to fuel their rumors. I reconnected with some of the women I had known during my first tenure as Duchess. The ones who had been kind to me before Catherine's lies had turned me into a pariah. They welcomed me back with varying degrees of warmth, some genuinely pleased to see me restored to my position, others merely being polite. I did not mind. I had learned to distinguish between true friendship and social convenience, and I was content with the few genuine connections I made. One afternoon in early autumn, nearly a year after our remarriage, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Mrs. Barrow, the kind woman from the orphanage who had noticed my attachment to Clara. She had come to Winterbourne to deliver a donation from the charitable society, and she asked to see me. I received her in the morning room, curious about what she might want. She congratulated me on my marriage and asked after Clara. I told her Clara was well, thriving under the care of her father and myself. Mrs. Barrow smiled and said she had suspected, even back then, that there was more to my interest in Clara than I had let on. She said she had seen the way I looked at the child, the desperate love in my eyes, and she had guessed that I was Clara's mother. She had said nothing, of course, respecting my privacy. But she wanted me to know that she was glad things had worked out, that Clara had found her way back to her family. I thanked her, my voice thick with emotion. I told her that her kindness during those dark days had meant more to me than she could know. She had treated me with dignity when I had felt utterly worthless, and I would never forget it. She squeezed my hand and said that she was simply glad to see a happy ending. There were so few of them in her line of work. After she left, I sat in the morning room and thought about all the people who had helped me along the way. The innkeeper's wife who had given me work and shelter, the widow who had hired me as a companion, the seamstress who had taught me a trade, Mrs. Barrow and the matrons at the orphanage who had allowed me to be near my daughter. These women had been my lifeline, my salvation, and I owed them a debt I could never fully repay. I spoke to Alexander about it that evening, and together we established a charitable foundation to support unwed mothers and children in need. We endowed it generously, ensuring that women like the one I had been would have resources and support, that they would not have to make the impossible choices I had made. It was our way of giving back, of ensuring that some good came from our suffering. Clara, now 8 years old, took an interest in the foundation. She asked if she could help, if she could visit the orphanage and the homes for unwed mothers. Alexander and I discussed it and agreed that it would be good for her to understand the realities of life beyond Winterbourne's walls, to develop compassion and a sense of responsibility. We took her with us on several visits, and I watched with pride as she played with the children, distributed toys and books, and listened with genuine interest to the stories of the women we helped. She asked me once if I had been like those women, if I had needed help when she was born. I told her yes, that I had been alone and frightened and unsure of how I would survive. She was quiet for a moment, then said she was glad I had been strong enough to get through it, because otherwise she would not have me now. I pulled her close and told her that she had been my strength, that knowing she existed had given me a reason to keep going. Winter came again, the second winter since our reunion, and with it a sense of peace I had never known. On Christmas Eve, we gathered in the drawing room, the three of us and a small group of close friends and trusted servants. Alexander read the Christmas story from the Bible, his deep voice resonant in the firelit room. Clara sat between us, her hand in mine, and I felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to my eyes. After the guests had departed and Clara had been tucked into bed, Alexander and I stood at the window of our chambers, looking out at the snow-covered grounds. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, and I leaned back against him, feeling safe and cherished. He said he had something for me, and he withdrew a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, a simple band of gold set with a single sapphire. He said it had been his mother's, that she had worn it every day of her married life. He said he wanted me to have it, as a symbol of our renewed commitment. of the life we were building together. I slipped it onto my finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made for me. I turned in his arms and kissed him, pouring all my love and gratitude into that kiss. When we finally pulled apart, I told him that these past 2 years had been the happiest of my life, not because they had been easy, but because we had faced every challenge together. I told him that I trusted him completely, that I knew he would never betray me again. And I told him that I was grateful for every moment, every day, every small joy we shared. He said he felt the same, that being given a second chance with me was a gift he would never take for granted. He said he would spend the rest of his life making sure I never regretted choosing him, never doubted his love. And then he led me to our bed, and we made love with a tenderness that spoke of years of shared history and a future full of promise. The years that followed were good years. Clara grew into a poised and intelligent young woman, beloved by the tenants and respected by society. She inherited Alexander's sense of duty and my love of learning, and she was determined to use her position to make a difference in the world. The charitable foundation we had established expanded under her guidance, helping hundreds of women and children. Alexander and I grew old together, our love deepening with each passing year. We had our disagreements, of course, our moments of frustration and misunderstanding. But we had learned to communicate, to listen, to forgive. We had learned that love was not a static thing, but something that required constant tending, constant effort. And we were willing to put in that effort because we knew what it was like to live without each other, and we never wanted to experience that loss again. When Clara turned 18, she asked us to tell her the full story of what had happened between us, the parts we had shielded her from when she was younger. We sat with her in the library, the three of us, and we told her everything. We told her about Catherine's lies, about the night I had been cast out, about the years of separation and suffering. We told her about finding each other again, about the slow, painful process of rebuilding trust and love. She wept as she listened. And when we finished, she embraced us both and said she was proud to be our daughter. She said she understood now why we had fought so hard to protect her, why we had been so determined to give her a stable, loving home. She said that our story, painful as it was, had taught her the value of perseverance, of forgiveness, of love that could survive even the darkest trials. I looked at my daughter, this remarkable young woman we had raised, and I felt a sense of completion. We had taken the broken pieces of our lives and created something beautiful. We had turned pain into purpose, loss into love. And in doing so, we had given Clara the greatest gift we could offer, a family built on truth and resilience and unwavering devotion. Alexander took my hand, and Clara took the other, and we sat together in the fading afternoon light, 3 people bound by blood and history and choice. We had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. We had found our way home. And that, I knew, was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. As I sit here now, many years later, writing these words in the journal I have kept since Clara's birth, I marvel at the journey we have taken. From the depths of despair to the heights of joy, from separation to reunion, from brokenness to wholeness. It has not been an easy road, but it has been ours, and I would not change a single step of it. Alexander is in the garden with our grandchildren, Clara's children, reading them stories under the old oak tree. His hair is white now, his movements slower, but his voice is still strong, still full of warmth and love. Clara is beside me, helping me record these memories for future generations. She wants her children to know their family's history, to understand that love is not always simple, but it is always worth fighting for. I look at the ring on my finger, the sapphire catching the light, and I remember the night Alexander gave it to me. I remember every moment of our life together, the good and the bad, the joyful and the sorrowful. And I am grateful for all of it, because it has made us who we are. The Duke abandoned his pregnant wife, yes, And I abandoned our daughter, leaving her in an orphanage because I had no other choice. But we found each other again, years later, in that very same orphanage. We found our daughter, and in finding her, we found our way back to each other. We rebuilt what had been broken, and we created something even stronger in its place. This is our story. This is our truth. And this is our legacy, a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and second chances. May those who come after us learn from our mistakes and be inspired by our triumph. May they know that no matter how dark the night, the dawn will always come. And may they understand that family, true family, is not just about blood. It is about choice, about commitment, about showing up every day and choosing love again and again, no matter what. This is what I want Clara's children to know. This is what I want the world to know. That love can survive anything if we are brave enough to fight for it. That redemption is possible even after the greatest betrayals. That we are never truly lost as long as we have someone who refuses to give up on us. Alexander is calling to me now, asking me to join him in the garden. Clara is smiling, urging me to go. I close this journal and set down my pen. There will be time later for writing, for remembering. Right now, I want to be with my family, to feel the sun on my face and hear my grandchildren's laughter. I want to sit beside my husband and feel his hand in mine. I want to watch Clara with her children and see the love in her eyes, the same love I have always felt for her. This is my life now. This is my happiness. And it is more than I ever dared to dream possible. All those years ago, when I was alone and broken and afraid, I survived. We survived. And we built something beautiful from the ashes of our pain. That is the greatest gift of all. I walk out into the garden, into the golden afternoon light, and I am home. I am finally, truly, eternally home.